In this video, we want to look at the differences between the recessionary gap and the shortfall. The recessionary gap, as you can see from the screen, is measured between the full employment equilibrium of 6 trillion and the actual equilibrium of 5.6 trillion. So once we define the gap, then we can define the shortfall. So the shortfall will be double the gap. The reason for this is if your equilibrium is at point A, you have to get all the way to point D to have the equilibrium that aligns with the 6 trillion of QF. So you are going to have to overshoot your gap all the way to point E, in other words, to the correct aggregate demand. The reason for that is the aggregate supply is upsloping. So as that happens, our price level is increasing. So the amount of money that has to be put forward to actually close that gap is going to have to take into account the rising prices. Therefore, it is your aggregate demand shortfall that has to be divided by your multiplier in order to get that initial injection, whether G or I. Then once that's put forth in the economy, then the multiplier effects would take over. So again, your shortfall is going to have to be beyond your actual gap, but you need to know both of them in order to actually fix the problem. Conversely, if you have an inflationary gap, the terminology would change and it would be an aggregate demand excess. You are still going to have to take out now twice the amount because you have to account once again that the fact that it's at this particular price level. So you have to move back by double the gap, in other words, contract by double the gap to get to the correct aggregate demand curve. So if, for example, you were at point D and this was your output 6 trillion, but let's just say, for example, the actual full employment equilibrium was 5.6, then again, you would have to take out the excess, move to the correct aggregate demand, and then you would be at the correct equilibrium. But in this particular graph, of course, we are looking at a shortfall, a recessionary gap, so we need to go forward all the way to aggregate demand 3 to give us our correct equilibrium at QF.